Cuba. From little-known stories of Cuba helping with America's revolution to the Spanish-American War, Cuba has had a significant relationship with the United States. The island of Cuba was originally settled by Christopher Columbus over a century before Jamestown. When the Revolutionary War began, the French were coming over to help Washington. They stopped off at Havana, Cuba, and the ladies of Havana gave their gold and jewelry, the equivalent of $28 million, to the French to deliver to George Washington, who was at Yorktown running out of money. And they said this was so that your sons would not be born slaves. Slavery began in the Caribbean in the 1500s, predominantly for working on sugar plantations. On Haiti, slaves revolted against the French, who controlled that half of the island, in 1792. And in 1807, the U.S. and Britain outlawed the importation of slaves. But slavery continued in Cuba. President James Buchanan wrote, "When a market for African slaves shall no longer be furnished in Cuba, Christianity and civilization may gradually penetrate the existing gloom." Well, in 1868, after the American Revolution, a revolt began in Cuba. It was a wealthy Cuban sugar farmer named Carlos Manuel de Cespedes. He was called Padre de la Patria, father of the country. Cespedes freed his slaves, and he began Cuba's first war for independence. It was called the 10 Years' War, and it was against the oppressive government of Spain. Freed slaves joined together with those of Spanish ancestry born in Cuba to fight for freedom and to end slavery. President Ulysses S. Grant stated December 2nd, 1872, "Slavery in Cuba is a terrible evil. It is greatly to be hoped that Spain will voluntarily adopt emancipation in sympathy with the other powers of the Christian and civilized world." In 1878, the Spanish government crushed the revolt, ending the 10 Years' War, in which over 200,000 died. Under international pressure, Spain finally ended slavery by royal decree in 1886. But Spain still ruled Cuba with an iron fist. And so in 1895, an open rebellion against Spain broke out in Cuba. Spain sent Governor Weyler to smash the freedom-loving Cubans. Weyler rounded up nearly 300,000 Cubans and forced them into crowded concentration camps. Between 1896 and 1897, nearly a third of the country's population was in concentration camps. With cesspools of raw sewage, 225,000 died of starvation, exposure, dysentery, and diseases like yellow fever. Pleas for help reached the shores of the United States, begging for the U.S. to intervene. Well, in 1898, the USS Maine was in Havana's harbor. It blew up under suspicious circumstances on February 15th, and this began the Spanish-American War. Congress wrote, "The abhorrent conditions which have existed for more than 3 years in the island of Cuba, so near our own borders, have shocked the moral sense of the people of the United States, have been a disgrace to Christian civilization, resolved that people of the island of Cuba are, and of a right ought to be, free." On July 3rd, the United States, aided by Teddy Roosevelt and his Rough Riders, captured Santiago, Cuba. The war in Cuba soon ended with Cuba's independence from Spain. The treaty, officially ending the Spanish-American War, was signed December 10th, 1898. President William McKinley wrote, "At a time of the glorious achievements of the naval and military arms at Santiago de Cuba, it is fitting that we should pause and reverently bow before the throne of divine grace, and give devout praise to God, who holdeth the nations in the hollow of his hands." Now, many wanted Cuba to be under the authority of the United States, similar to Puerto Rico. Well, not wanting to be imperialistic, America instead recognized Cuba's independence, though it maintained a naval base in Cuba at Guantanamo Bay.